Right, draft budget presentation number 3 to 23-24. I'll hand over to Sharon. I'll just go through and do a couple of housekeeping things. So firstly, we're gathering on Kaurna land this evening. We live, work and play on Kaurna land. This briefing session has been convened in accordance with section 90A of the Local Government Act for the purpose of discussing the draft budget to 23-24. This session will be used solely for the purpose of information sharing and not for the purpose of debating issues, building consensus positions, or otherwise discharging Council's deliberative and decision-making functions. There's no set agenda, no minutes. To limit disruption, if we can turn our mobile phones off, please, or switch to silent. And please, if you need to take a phone call, please take it outside. And I don't think we'll be going into confidence. I haven't been advised that we will be. So I'm going to hand over to Sharon Perkins now, and she'll take us through a presentation. And we do have our papers. I've got my papers anyway. Got them here. So Sharon, if you'd like to get cracking on this presentation, and then we can have a bit of a discussion around, sorry? Well, Councillor Vallelonga wasn't here. He left very early in the piece at the beginning of the previous presentation. And Councillor Solomon has gone home sick. It's not very well. And Councillor White is an apology because he is unwell as well. So there you go. Thank you. Right.
Thanks,
Sharon.
Thanks, Mayor. So I'll just do a quick presentation. So basically the purpose of the presentation is just to provide you an overview of the position of where the budget is based on the information and the, I suppose the projects that executive have actually gone through and are presenting for recommendation. Just before we start, I just thought this is one of the areas that I missed last presentation. As part of the local government reform, the government has actually introduced the local government advice scheme. So this was the alternative to the rate capping policies that the Liberal government wanted to introduce. And basically this is an oversight scheme provided by SCOSA. And they're actually making an independent assessment of each of the councils to make sure that the rates that are charged and collected from the community is actually based sustainable.
Yeah, Sharon, what about the timing? Because when it was going to be introduced before, there was an issue with the timing, going to the audit committee and everything else.
If you just let me finish.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So making sure that basically what we're charging and what we're providing the community is that there is actually a relationship to that, and to make sure that we're providing that value for money. So again, and realistically, so a number of councils went through it as part of the 22-23 budget cycle, and all that sort of stuff, and we're actually due in the 24-25. So obviously the decisions that we make today will potentially have an impact, or we need to actually think about what we actually do with regard to the impact that the decisions have today on our long-term financial plan, on our asset management plans, and making sure that we actually maintain those linkages, because I've read the reports that have come out from the councils that were subject to it as part of the 22 and 23 year, and that was actually the major emphasis. So on a timing perspective, so it's around September, we basically will have to provide all the information through to SCOSA, and then they'll actually go through that evaluation. So a lot of it is from publicly available information that they're actually making that assessment from our long-term financial plans, asset management plans, annual reports, annual business plans and budgets, and all that sort of stuff as well. No, you can adopt it. So basically they'll do the assessment afterwards and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, so they're not actually providing advice on your actual individual budget. They're providing advice on your, I suppose, your financial management, your financial sustainability, taking into account your past performance, your long-term financial plan, what you've actually got in your community plan, asset management plans, and all those linkages to make sure that, yes, you are providing. Yeah. So I just highlight that as to sit there and say for the 24-25 financial year. And, you know, as with the state government, there's the charge. So effectively it's $40,000 for each of the councils to go through this process. So after last session that we had, the executive team got together and went through all the projects, both capital projects, and main focus was actually on the operating initiatives to determine which we actually thought were what I would sit there and say the non-negotiables that we actually need to do or progress for this financial year as well. So, and as a result of that, so as I mentioned previously in the email that I sent out the other week, so we have actually gone through that and we've actually identified some savings or some potential savings or potential reduction in that initiatives budget. Also, in relation to the draft budget, so this is actually based on a rate revenue increase of CPI plus growth. And there's more information later on in the pack, but I know that this is actually the key information that everyone asks.
CPI, what's CPI?
So we're basing it on the CPI forecast of around about 6.5%.
Plus growth.
Plus growth, which is
So the rate rise will be 6.5%.
Plus growth. So the rate rise, the rate for the individual, for the average residential rate payer, will be around 3.7%, which equates to around $65. So there's information further in the pack to actually provide that information. So we have had the first cut of our valuation data. So that's basically our initial position. So there will be some movement in that because we basically get updates from now through to the 30th of June.
So is it 3.5 or 6.5?
So the rate revenue increase is going to be 6.5% plus growth, growth.
But the rate rise.
The rate for the average, for the average rate for the residential is 3.7.
What's the range? The range.
What do you mean the range? I don't understand your question in the sense of saying.
Well, we do an average rate rise, but there's always a range of, you know, people with cheaper properties and people with more expensive properties.
I don't have that. Like, so basically we literally just got the first cut of the valuation data on Sunday. And so we haven't actually gone through all the modelling. So this is still pretty much based on, I know what the valuation, the overall valuation, but I haven't gone through and done the interrogation of, you know, for that, but there will be some people that go down. There will be some people around the 3.7 or $65, and then there potentially will be some people that are high, just depending on that. I just haven't done that analysis yet.
Right.
Thank you.
So we'll be changing the rate in the dollar if the value of the properties has gone up or not?
Yep. So the rate in the dollar will come down. Yep. As I said, there's a slide further on. So based on that criteria, so effectively the proposed operating deficit is down to about $1.5 million. And that's actually through a reduction of the operation and operating initiatives of around about 413,000. And then an assumption based on that the social planner and the economic development officer won't commence until October, because obviously we have to go through that recruitment process as well. And 3 months is probably pretty much a standard recruitment process. And this is just this information, this is just provided for more information. So this is just referring to, I think, the comments that Cody asked at the last session about, you know, well, how much do I spend on this? And I referred to the fact of breaking down the budget and the recurrent spend into, I suppose, service groups. And this is where I've done that and looked at that, the individual service groups and tried to group like type activities together. And broken it down as to sit there and say how much is, sorry? So again, the groupings might change and there might be a bit of a massaging with the categorizations.
Isn't Home Assist externally funded?
Yeah, but there is a cost associated with that. So this is based on the expenditure. Yes, we do have grant funding, but this is that $36.647 million of expenditure broken down into the categories to sit there and say, this is how much we're spending on the services that we're actually delivering. Again, as I get my head around, I suppose where the structure of the finances from a Town of Gawler perspective, there may be some massaging around with the figures and with some of the areas, but generally this is the breakdown of that 36.6 million into specific areas. So hopefully, and this is one of the things that we'll actually do in the annual business plan as well, is present it in this way rather than we will still have the straight financial component because we're required to do that by legislation. But like to try and tell the story about where the budget is, where we're getting spending and where people's money is going. This is the way we're proposing to actually present that information throughout the plan. So hopefully people can relate to the document more so than just saying, shit, what does this mean? So again, that's just for your information.
Yep, that's great. That's very good, Sharon. I think everyone appreciates that level of detail.
And this is just basically as a percentage rather than the whole dollars as well. So, yep.
Yeah. Do you want to put your mic on? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, firstly, I agree with the Mayor. The way this is presented is very palatable. You know, the average punter can look at this and see the business. It's not a new technique, but you're using it well. So I definitely appreciate that. I did pick up on the fact that you didn't have the figures, the money there. So if I was to offer any feedback, it would just be in that pie chart, turn around and say in the middle, $37 million. And then the percentages would then flow out or something, because it would mean that snapshot from the average punter could educate themselves on the business totally.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Yep, take that. And normally that's how it's presented. I just figured that sometimes people like percentages as to how much of that spread from a percentage basis rather than that whole dollar. So just in relation to, so from a rating perspective, so I've still presented, so in the pack, there's still obviously those different options for your rate revenue. However, the dark blue column is what this information is being based on. And I suppose from an administration perspective is what the recommendation will be in the report that comes to you for you to consider to endorse that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things in relation to, so basically from a general rate increase, so this is the rate revenue that's actually raised from our existing ratepayers. So when I refer to the general ratepayer, so that's based on a 6% that should be rate revenue increase. This is actually the spread of where it's actually getting collected from.
So this is rate revenue.
This is rate revenue.
Yeah.
Yep. So this is the $27 million rate revenue, gross rate revenue, and all that sort of stuff as well. So it is actually interesting in the sense that normally I've looked at the figures over the last couple of years. valuations in regard to the commercial sector have actually pretty much come back post-COVID. So we are actually seeing big property valuation increases in the commercial sector, which is actually causing a bit of a shift in where you're actually generating your revenue from, and it's moving towards the commercial sector compared to the residential sector. But I'll still put a caveat on that. This is basically the first cut, and we get supplementary changes every single week. So there will be some movement with regard to that. And I haven't literally analysed where, you know, the vacant land, because we normally get a shift from vacant land through to residential and commercial as we go through the planning process.
Can you put your mic on?
So
people can hear?
just say that again. Thank
Sorry,
you.
can you give us an example of what might be another?
So in other is basically your churches, your schools, your what's in other is most of the things that basically are eligible for mandatory rebates. So your community service of housing, land uses and all that sort of stuff as well. So
So community housing is, a lot of land has gone to community, like public housing has gone to community housing, hasn't it?
yeah, so a few, probably about 5, or maybe even longer, about 5. So government progressively has been transferring those to community service obligations. So previously councils would have charged the state government 100% rates on those properties, but as they transition and outsource that function to those community services groups, councils now have to actually rebate 75% of those rates back to those groups under the legislation as well. So
Yeah, and churches are exempt.
churches are 100%, schools are 100%, private schools and all that sort of stuff. I know that.
So we count them as revenue, even though we're going to have to.
So this is basically gross. This is gross
Gross,
revenue.
thank you.
So I've allowed in
Yep.
those figures
Yep.
the fact that we'll actually be rebating it. It's just from a modelling perspective. It's just so much easier to do it on a gross basis.
Sorry, councillor Kosh, yes, absolutely.
No, Sharon, Sharon, you said the schools are rebated back. Now, we're going to look at Trinity, because wasn't it you mentioned
Starplex.
Starplex, because that's a
Starplex.
commercial enterprise.
Yeah.
And there's physiotherapists, the whole works there at Starplex.
So there is 2 discretionary rebates that the council has granted to, one to Starplex and one to the Jockey Club, which effectively have been in place for 10 years, which I think is due to be reviewed. They should actually be reviewed every year as to whether they still meet the eligibility criteria. Based on my assessment, I think the initial granting of those discretionary rebates was actually provided under the incorrect part of the Act. And the section of the Act that they should have been provided actually does have a 10-year time frame on it anyway. So that's potentially like, so the figures there that in the draft budget is still assuming that they will be in receipt of that discretionary rebate. So obviously if the council resolves not to actually provide that discretionary rebate, that's money coming back to us as well.
So that was the dogs, wasn't it? Not the jockeys, it was the dogs.
No,
No,
it's the Jockey Club. It's the Jockey.
Jockey
It's
Club.
the-
Okay, but we've given free rent to the dogs as well.
So that's not a rebate.
That's
If you're actually giving them free lease or free use of the property, but effectively there's been no discretionary rebate.
So we can't review the dogs.
Well, we can review the dogs, but it's not part of the rating strategy.
Anyway, keep going, Sharon, keep going.
So again, this is pretty much the same information that I was provided previously. However, I've just updated it based on the actual valuation information that we've received. And as you can see that really, so even though we've got I suppose a recommending a higher rate revenue increase, the rate in the dollar is still actually coming down from last year, which was 0.0046 for residential and proposing it to go down to 0.43. And that equates to a $65 average rate. So that's for the residential land use, which equates to around about a 3.7% increase. So, you know, there's not necessarily the linear translation between what the rate revenue increase is compared to what the actual impact is on the rate payer.
No, that's a really good,
Yeah.
that's a really.
So,
good-
yeah, so it does take a lot of people
Yeah.
to get their head around it. But when I talk about rate revenue, I'm not talking about the rate.
No,
Yeah.
no. I think this is a really good chart.
But again, I'll
And
still
this is
sit there and say,
in line with the long-term financial plan.
so the rate revenue increase is higher than the long-term financial plan, but effectively, I think from to actually make sure that, as I said at our last session, realistically, we need to go higher to get that compounding impact to relieve some of the pressure and to bring the council back into, I suppose, financial sustainability or operating surplus, particularly on the I'll just go back here on that recurrent operating. You know, realistically, what we should be aiming for is trying to build up an operating surplus. So we've actually got that buffer to actually invest and do those new initiatives and that impact as well. So and again, from a commercial, so basically I've just done this from a commercial and land use because they're predominantly our main two sources of income. Pretty much the same for Leicester. As I said, capital value increase for commercial is big this year, which is probably haven't seen that for quite a few years. So those commercial properties values are actually coming back post-COVID. And then obviously, because we still have the adjustment that we actually provide to our commercial operators based on their land value. So I've applied the same percentages that were applied to last year. However, I have rounded them because you had some really bizarre percentages, like you had 23.85. So I have rounded them for ease and all that sort of stuff. So but yeah, so that's basically the so there's pretty much 13 properties in the 5 million plus valuation threshold. And I did actually have them written down. Sorry. Yeah, so they're your Coles and your Aldi and your Woolworths and all that sort of stuff. So
Okay,
thank
you.
Yeah, so that's that. So that's just more for information. But again, this hasn't gone through the modelling. This is the raw calculations based on the general principles. There will be some massaging around, but and you know, hopefully I'm not too far off. And so that basically brings it to I suppose the recommended projects, which is your information that was provided last week. So
Yes, I got it.
Yep.
Look. You've got it
Hopefully.
too.
If people did forget it, I do have a spare copy here for Jim's that I've been walking around with for days. Not to give him. So we have reduced the total capital projects budget down to 8.7 million. So that's around about $1.4 million reduction. Predominantly in the new projects program. Just to point out, as again, even though we've reduced it, it's actually only having a cash impact and an impact on the level of borrowings that's required. So it won't actually have any direct impact this financial year on our operating surplus by having this reduction. It might have a slight in the sense of some financing costs. I will point out in relation to the reduction of $1.4 million, we have moved to below the line 2 projects. One of them was mentioned last night in relation to the Deadmines Path toilet replacement and the new shed at Everston Gardens Primary School. We've done that because as part of the there's still the continuation of some of the stimulus projects grant funding program in the local roads and community infrastructure program. So there's phase 3A and phase 4 coming out as part of the 23-24 financial year. However, one of the requirements of that project, that funding, is that the council can't have already committed the funds through a budget. So effectively, the idea of that program is for councils to bring forward expenditure to actually to keep that stimulus in the economy. So so we have looked at those projects, and we've looked at what the actual criteria is for that funding agreement, and those two projects actually fit. So effectively we will be doing them, and they're pretty much fully funded as well. So so that's the reason why we've actually taken those two out. There was a strategic perspective, and obviously our approach will be that when grant funding becomes available, new funding things, we'll be looking at those where the project requires not to be part of an already, has to be outside of the budget. We will look at those projects. However, if we can actually get funding for already budgeted projects, we'll actually look at these projects that we actually have in place. Like, for example, the local roads program. We can fund a local road, a road project that meets the criteria that's within our budget. So we will actually be looking at that philosophy to actually, I suppose, reduce some of the impact as well on the delivery of the program to get that external funding without actually introducing new projects over and above the ones that we've actually already considered as well.
Sharon, can I just interrupt? Do we
Yes.
have a lot of grants like that that are dependent on not being a budget item? Is that quite
Yeah.
common?
So these warrants were quite specific because they were actually part of the COVID program and all that sort of stuff. And the idea at that point in time was to, make sure that people don't, I suppose, the construction industry and all that sort of stuff doesn't fall off the cliff at the end of some of those projects, and to keep people, I suppose, employed during that period. But most of them are basically part funded. So, there's normally you'd only get 100% funding as part of an election promise from a party. But most other programs, funding programs, are that the council has to actually make a contribution. And that's where I would be advocating to sit there and say, well, council's already committed to some of these projects already. So we've already committed to the 100% funding of these projects. So if we can get 50% funding, we should actually be going for those rather than saying, oh, okay, well, we've got an extra money here, so we'll actually increase the spend. Increase the spend to get some money where it might actually already be suit an existing project, or even maybe an existing project with some slight tweaks can actually make the funding program. So yeah, so I'll hand that over to you, and then and pretty much for you to have your discussion and ask your questions. And as I said, I suppose the one things that we haven't actually gone through as a group at this point in time is obviously the elected member submissions. So we didn't get a chance to do that last time from that perspective. But I suppose as an executive, the capital projects that are presented here and also the operating initiatives that are presented here are what we consider, I suppose, the things that we need to do to actually, I suppose, position ourselves obviously for the potential growth that's happening in the region, but also to address the community needs and the service levels that we've committed to as a council.
So thank you, Sharon, and thank you to the leadership team for your work in this space. I know it wouldn't have been easy to cut projects. So discussion, elected members. Yes, David.
Just a question about yeah, well done in the presentation. It's a really good summary too. Question on the Economic Development Officer, sort of it's an extra position. It's sort of something I've been thinking about. Would it be possible to even start that position as a part-time and see how that develops? Or I'm also talking about partnerships with RDA or other organisations, but we've sort of worked fairly closely with the Gawler Business Development Group, I thought, in sort of this work. So just sort of after some ideas or thoughts or on that question, please, through the chair.
Yes, Economic Development Officer, which has a big role, and so does the Senior Social and Community Planner. Have you cut the job description yet, David? No? Just your thoughts on both those positions and David's thoughts.
Thank you, through the chair. Of course, anything's possible. Going to part-time would just delay some of the delivery, essentially. So we already understand that we're not delivering on our economic development strategy and tourism plan as we would like to. That's why we are suggesting a full-time resource attached to that delivery. If we made it a part-time resource, then we'd have to prioritise their project delivery, and certain things wouldn't get there and still remain either partially completed or not started as a result. In terms of the Senior Social Community Planner, it's a very broad role. We understand that, but we do have a refined position description in that space, which is good.
Yeah, good.
But the outcomes are still going to be as broad as what was presented through to council, because we need them to be involved in many different things. So effectively, you could create part-time positions, but delivery of what we require would just be delayed in that space.
So you haven't cut anything out of the social and community planner role? Is that a no?
So no, we haven't cut what we're needing that person to deliver. The same as economic development officer, we haven't cut what that person would need to deliver either. If they were to go part-time, we'd have to reduce those elements to ensure that.
I didn't say
coping.
part-time, I just said, because you had an enormous amount in that job description. You had at least 13 dot points, and underneath each of those dot points, there were at least 4 dot points.
In terms of what they're delivering, yes, there are high-level categories. The job description doesn't go to that level of detail. So the job description is slightly different, but we all operate at high levels of demand and need and capacity. We're all operating at that kind of level. So we'd expect the person coming in to be delivering on those objectives, because that's the requirements of the role.
David, you had your hand up again.
I was sort of probably asking, I know we've got like the tourism plan and different business plans, but just some examples of some projects that we actually want delivered in the next 12 months, or I suppose in the next 9 months if it's October start.
So some projects that are likely to be delivered by the Economic Development Officer and also the Social Planner, David? Or just the Economic Development Officer?
I sort of understand. I mean, we've got a lot of social issues in Gawler, and we've also got a lot of business, but so I sort of understand probably the output from the social side of things and the social planner. I think that's certainly an area that I think but I just with the business development group in Gawler and the RDA and this role, I just want to sort of get my head around how that's going to be effective.
So I'll just put it to you, David, the projects that the Economic Development Officer would deliver on
Yeah, so through the chair.
in the first 12 months.
Yes, so
That was the question.
through the chair, increasing our online presence for the visitor economy would be definitely a key outcome that they do over that 9-month period. Creating better tourism opportunities and connections. We'd also be looking in the economic development space about developing a brief for a branding strategy for Gawler, because that's a big gap that we have. We don't have a branding element for Gawler. Maintaining the operational liaison with both Regional Development Australia, Barossa Gawler, Adelaide Plains and the Gawler Business Development Group. So it's actually taking that function away from our existing special projects officer into that role, because our existing special projects officer is operating, in all honesty, about 150% capacity. So alleviating that because she's managing all the grants that we've got. Obviously, up to consideration of council is the future management of the Innovation Hub. And that would be a key outcome from that role as well, if council elected to continue operating the hub, but more so influencing the incubator program coordination, marketing and promotioning of that hub, so that we can actually get some startup development happening within Gawler. So there are a few key projects over that initial period.
I think that addresses your question. I'll go to councillor Hennessy.
Yeah, I'm recalling that in presentations from both the RDA and the Gawler Business Development Board is that they're seeking somebody to work with. They're not looking to do the work for council. So I actually see this role as somebody that will join with those two and get the best partnerships, but without a person there, I think there's a bit of a link missing. I don't think we can just say that the business in this town will be undertaken by those two organisations. I think we've got to put some resources on the ground to do that.
Councillor Samble.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, David, I know you've heard me dozens of times about the fact that the staff that you have at the moment, and 2 persons operating a visitor information centre and things like that. The whole concept of tourism and visitation to our town and to every other town. And I know I can speak about Victoria because I had a really good look around what they were doing over there. And the whole concept of probably what we developed or decided to go along with was a tourism plan for the town, say 3 or 4 years ago, is not the same as it is today. People were doing things online, and there's so many things that, as you know, Ethan is looking into the RV thing at the moment, and I hear all these things that are put up there. If this new person can give us the guidelines that we can support to move forward with the current tourism model that it is now. The tourism model, when I was asked to set up the tourism in the town at the Gawler Visitor Information Centre, has died. It's completely a new ball game now. Because I had to do with the visitor centre, am getting complaints sometimes on a daily basis about, you know, like, gee, what's going on? This is not working, that's not working. And I agree with what Councillor Hughes and also Councillor Hennessy said, that I'm very confused about the fact of the Business Development Board, the RDA, all these sort of things. We don't seem to be on the same train and it's not working. So if this new person is going to turn that all around and maybe some of our staff step up a bit, because at the moment, I personally don't believe it's working for the betterment of tourism for Gawler.
So the Economic Development Officer is not there to do the job of Gawler Business Development Group or the RDA. And I would hate to think that they would actually do that job, because that's their job. And I think there needs to be some real delineation between what this, if this position gets up, that they're not actually going to meetings and they're not actually delivering on these projects that you want them to be delivered on. And because we've had business development roles before, and they haven't been a great success. They haven't been a great success. And so I look at this role and I go, okay, is that going to be any different than in the previous 15, 20 years ago? And Brian's right, tourism is different now. So how do we actually use the money that we spend on tourism currently, and we do spend quite a bit of money on tourism, how do we actually move that and change that up? How do we bring in change effectively to enable a better bang for buck than what we're currently getting. So I think the Economic Development Officer, you know, David's got some concerns, and we've got history around this particular position. So how do we actually make it work? And I would hate to think that the Gawler Business Development Group see that Economic Development Officer as, oh, that they can do this, 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 and this. So there has to be a defined role for that person who needs to be able to deliver on those projects or whatever it is that they're going to do. My view around Economic Development Officer is high level strategic, not going down and doing tasks. Because if all they're going to do is tasks, then it's a failure. So it needs to be high level, it needs to be strategic, and it needs to look at the whole economic development nature of the town of Gawler and where the opportunities lie. And we need somebody who can think at that high level. If we don't get that person, it will fail. It will fail. And we'll have wasted a lot of money, because that is a lot of money. I actually think we do need a senior social and community planner. I think but I think they've got too much on their plate. I'm going to say it again, that if you put a person in a position and they're working at 150%, you'll have a revolving door of people coming in. And I've seen that happen in health with different project management positions. And it doesn't, you really need to nail what they're going to do, and you need to not stack it. Because otherwise you'll have a revolving door. So yeah, they're my thoughts. I don't know if anybody else has got any thoughts on the positions. Yep, Deputy Mayor.
I had a different question. If I asked for the 2021-2022 budget as presented and endorsed, and then I asked for the outcomes of each spend put next to the categories, is that something that's easy to produce? Obviously, all I'm trying to get to here is estimated versus actual to this sort of level.
From a current perspective, the current operating perspective.
Are you talking about capital projects, Nathan, or
I'm talking about
everything?
budget. So there's a budget that was endorsed based on estimates. What were the actuals?
Oh, just the budget versus actuals for that particular year.
That particular year.
That should be good. That should be fine, because obviously there's a requirement from the Act perspective to present that report each year. But did you want to at the function level, or just at a straight straight financial level?
Yeah.
Financial level is really easy.
Yeah.
Or did you want it based on the
So
service level?
So I'll give you an example. This year, I'm just going to pick one at random. We have a stormwater erosion control that's 100 grand. If I get to this time after the budget process and ask the same question and say, was it 100 grand, or was it 105, or was it a 95, or how do we get? So I just want that breakdown.
How much did it actually cost?
Yeah, estimated, actual, and not just recurrent. I'm looking at new initiatives. I'm looking at the budget.
We see that.
We do. Yeah, we do on quarterly adjustments and everything. That's why I'm saying it should be somewhat easy to be able to present the whole thing to go actuals. I'm happy to take this conversation offline.
Effectively, it's doable.
Yeah.
I don't know, because obviously from a 21-22, again, from that level of the projects, but again, there should be a report that's presented as at the end of the financial year. That's presented as part of the package when you actually consider the annual financial statements, that should have been presented. So it shouldn't be too hard
To show in the format. Yep. Cool.
So I'm going to focus on the elected member bids. We haven't talked about them, and I think it is timely to have a bit of a discussion. So I'm looking at, I don't know if everyone's brought their copy with them, but the elected member bids. Now, I don't think any of these have had a motion attached to them that have gone through council. They're just bids. And previously, I've allowed motions to put up motions at special council meetings so that we can assess them accordingly in a decision-making environment. So I think whoever's put them up, and I know if Isaac, you're watching, you've got one, Deputy Mayor, you've got a number, and I've got one. And I don't think there's any others. You've got one coming up. You've put yours in a motional notice. Well done. So I think we should craft our motions on notice that they go above the line, basically just go above the line. We've done that previously. Yes, we've actually put it through as a motion. So we actually assess on merit the bids, because they haven't actually got a motion attached to them. We've done this previously in previous budget cycles, and I think it works rather well. And it doesn't just automatically go in, but we actually assess them accordingly.
Mayor, can I just ask them, because one of the six is no longer, I would imagine, relevant. The
Which one's
activation
that?
of the Little Paxton Street site, would you agree, Deputy Mayor?
Where's that? No,
I'm on the,
where are you?
I'm looking at the document that we were handed tonight, and I'm looking at the page 8.
I'm on page 8, and we've got
No,
1,
I'm
2,
the wrong
3,
thing.
4, 5, 6. We've got 6. Yep.
And the,
So which one are you
and the
looking
third
at?
one down?
Activation of Little Paxton Street.
Oh, no, that actually, no, I'm sorry, that isn't
That's Little Paxton
that's not
Street.
the car club then. No.
No.
that's okay.
Oh, it is?
It is the car club one.
Oh, so we don't need that. How did that get in? Are you going to withdraw that one?
So just so I'm clear, are we just having a brief discussion about where these budget bids come from? Okay, no worries. So the activation of Little Paxton Street, yes, absolutely. The car club contingency of this bid was the motivation behind it. That said, I don't necessarily want to withdraw it. However, I don't think it's necessary to put it above the line in this budget process, but I don't want it just to disappear, because I see some merit in the ability of activation of this space, whether it be a car club or it be another community outcome, or failing that, there's even a development opportunity on a commercial level. I think the conversation still needs to be going, because we have invested in investigations, and we've also had a community club invest in the investigations of this site. I do note the decision of council last meeting, and although I believe it's against what the car club did request of us at the time, you know, I still don't see the merit of going, yes, right now we want to move that above the line.
So that's why we have motions, and I think that they can stand on their merits or not. And that way, if you're wanting to put this up, I think that it is important to put a motion, and we assess each one on their merits. And if it gets up, it gets up. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And
So
I think that's the strength of democracy,
Yeah.
local democracy. And I just think that, you know, we can put these things up, but if it hasn't gone through a report, it hasn't got a motion attached to it, it hasn't got a lot of strength to it. If it has a motion, so I think we can put some motions up. So I would suggest, and I'll be putting one up for the decorations. There's a support for community Christmas parade. So if Isaac, you're watching, perhaps craft a motion. and get it through to the CEO?
So on that, as a matter of process, if I'm turning around and I'm saying, look, I want to get my motion up in regards to the activation of Little Paxton Street. However, I don't want it above the line of the 2023-2024 budget.
You want it below the line?
I want it below the line, but still on the record
You
because.
might, that's going to be a little bit difficult, and I'll explain why. A budget process is about bids and it goes on merit, and each year we have different bids. So what I would suggest is if you think it should go below the line this year, you might want to put it back up next year. I don't, because otherwise it may not get put back in. I don't know how you continue to put it on the agenda
Well,
otherwise.
I mean, we've done budget deliberations before and we see the below the line budget bids and we see them keep on popping up, and we can choose at any time to resurrect a budget bid that has been made the chopping board because it's below the line, but the elected body turn around and say, hey, actually, this has a priority level at this point in time. But there are a lot of good staff bids that sit below the line year by year that we actually can make a choice of any time.
My view would be, if you're happy to put it below the line, but I suggest you put it back in next year, because I don't mean.
Well, it depends on
Kind of
what
provide
situation
comment,
we're in next
CEO.
year.
Perhaps I'll ask CEO to provide a comment.
Yeah, I think that if the intention, Nathan, is that you acknowledge that this is not the right time, given recent decisions and deliberations, then effectively would otherwise that you would not present a motion for the special meeting for it to be above the line.
Correct.
You might present a motion that acknowledges your consideration and that the council to turn its mind to it in future budgets. However, it'll be effectively below the line or not presented as a motion, but it's on the record as it already is. And that when we're in the budget cycle for 24-25, which will be at the end of the calendar year, then if the circumstances are such that you want to raise it from the table effectively, then it's back on the agenda.
You could incorporate that as a motion.
Yeah, so if I'm listening correctly, I don't have to do anything now with this particular bid. It's going to form part of the draft budget that we're going to come through and endorse. By default, it'll be below the line because none of us have moved it above the line. Yeah. Yeah, which is fine. That's my intention.
Okay.
Is that, I see Sharon nodding, but.
Just through, I suppose I'm still understanding your process and all that sort of stuff, but I'll just use from past experiences. So obviously, in the report that will be presented at the special council meeting, I would probably still present as part of that as an attachment to that report what all the submissions that are still below the line as well,
Yes.
even though that they're not incorporated as part of the draft budget as recommended, but effectively I would still sit there and put that as a draft budget. So based on this discussion tonight, I would sit there and say, oh, okay, well, I would just move that. So it's still, as Henry said, it's still on the record.
Yes.
So we're aware of it and all that sort of stuff. It's just basically from a
From a recommendation.
a staffing perspective, from
Yes.
our staff, we wouldn't be recommending it.
That's right. And that's what I'm agreeing with in this particular
And then-
time.
Okay.
But with
Alright.
all due respect, whatever is below the line, the decision will come to the chamber. And if we turn around and change up, it is our job or will to do so. Not saying we will, but I'm just saying those options need to be there.
Yeah.
And my bid is no different to a staff bid that didn't make it above the line.
And then I suppose if there's anything that's been presented that's recommended from staff, that's below the line, I suppose that's where the motion to actually bring it up.
Resurrect it, correct. And that's what we've done in the past.
Whether that happens at a special council meeting or whether that happens in other budget processes. It's, I suppose that's the philosophy or the process that where I've come from is how we've actually dealt with these project bids that I suppose aren't being recommended for inclusion for this current calendar year, so.
So we'll, excluding the activation of Little Paxton Street, any other discussion around the other items? Yes, yes. Oh, sorry, actually, I think Helen Hennessy wanted to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, I was through the chair. I guess I'm looking at the same type of comment and would encourage perhaps the deputy mayor to talk about the shade cloth and the inclusive play, given that we've had some presentations from staff, that some of that stuff is now underway. Especially, I'm thinking particularly what's happening down at the Apex Park. So.
Yeah, look, I'm more than happy to respond if that's all
Yeah,
right with you, Matt.
absolutely, yeah.
These budget bids are put forward to start the conversation, and they are the collaborative approach to say the shade sale over playground, hey staff, is this a double up with some work you're doing? And those are the questions and the deliberations and the conversations that I'd like to have. So that would be a question through the chair to Wendy in the same way while we're answering those sorts of questions. When we talk about inclusive play, that $100,000 there is about activating that inclusive play to be able to support things that fall under the category of sensory play, which budget bids, as I'm sure staff will agree with, if there's nothing there, there's nothing going to happen for the next year.
So you've got a design that we saw the other night, Wendy. You might want to jump in. And there was quite a bit of inclusive play, and I thought there was some interactive sand play, etc. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep, through the chair. So last council meeting, we put up a report about the Apex Park inclusive space. We actually asked for additional budget, I know you weren't here, Nathan, to support the integration of that space into the rest of the site. So look, I could play go other way with this. I mean, more money to make it even more inclusive and bigger and better is something that, if the chamber wants to discuss, that's an opportunity. At this point, we're moving forward with what the approved budget is, and there is it's incorporating all elements of inclusive play, so it has got sensory components.
There has got sensory components. I thought so. I thought I saw, yeah.
This has got 100,000.
So we gave it, so for the benefit of people who might be listening, we had a report come back the other night and we added an extra 60,000 to include inclusive play elements. And it ended up being around about 100,000 extra because it was 40 plus 60. I think that was correct.
So through the chair, so the original budget was $60,000 through state government election commitment projects, plus we have another 40,000 through the local roads and community infrastructure program grant scheme, and that report then asked for another, I believe, up to 90, which was 60 for the integration works and 30 as a contingency for a number of factors which may need to be considered once we've gone through community consultation. So
that there is sensory play elements incorporated in the design of, and so that being said, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, just to remind members, these bids were put in well before.
Oh,
those
yeah, no,
reports.
absolutely,
Like,
absolutely. No,
And
yeah.
I'm using that process to be
Yeah.
able to have these discussions, which, I recommend everyone to take up on. And given the staff's appetite in this space that is now becoming more apparent, this bid does drop out, in my opinion, because we're working in that space. This is what this bid was trying to do.
And you did bring it in very early on. Yeah, you did.
I can talk about the. Yeah, I'd love to talk about the call of 42, absolutely. So shade sale over playground.
So through the chair, so in this financial year, we've got two extra shade sale projects going on, again, partly supported by election commitment funding. In next financial year's budget, there is no additional shade sale included over any playground, so that will be up for the chambers to discuss whether that's something you want to consider.
So that's worthy of a motion. That's worthy of a motion. yeah, so I'd suggest you put that in as a motion, Nathan. Okay, so we've got that. So if we go away and work on our motions, just say this bid P 230843, for example, go above the line or whatever. And that's the nature of the motion. And when it comes to, just one moment, I'm still speaking. When it comes up to a special council meeting, when we've got a deliberative function, then we can assess those motions and we can have lively debate if required or not. Some of us may think they're really good ideas, etc. So we'll see where it goes. Okay, now you had your hand up. Yes.
I just make members aware, so effectively the value of these council member bids aren't included in that draft, that figure, that they are not. So obviously any of the capital components, obviously the shade sale, so that's would need to be added to the capital project, and any of the initiatives, like for example, the support for the community Christmas parade would have to be added to the initiatives budget total. So
Councillor Hennessy.
Yeah, I'm just particularly on those first two. I'm very mindful. I think it was Councillor Solomon asked for a breakdown, a question on without notice, and we were given a fairly thorough breakdown of what we're already spending.
yeah,
And I think from memory, it's beyond 60,000 now. So if these two bids were added in, we're hitting the 100,000, and that causes me some concern. So I just raise that as an issue when it does come to a motion and we discuss it. I think that information needs to come back.
So they will be motions that we will debate. Okay. Yes, sure. Absolutely.
With the community Christmas parade, I asked some questions at the CCS meeting around traffic management, and then there was some toing and froing. For example, I think we spent a lot of money doing the traffic management Walker Place for the Fringe night. And then at the Christmas carols, I don't think we spent any money on traffic management. I couldn't see any budget line at all there for traffic management. So you've got two things. And just, I mean, I was a bit concerned when I didn't see any traffic management budget line for the Christmas carols, because we actually have had an incident there a couple of years ago. I think people remember that. And
yes,
that was quite serious. That was quite serious. And I'm surprised that there wasn't, anybody there. Well, I'd just like to know what the extent of the traffic management was, because I mean, that could be a really big component in that. Because I was speaking to another councillor in another council area who coordinates a Christmas parade in their council, and she was saying they might have to stop doing it because it's just the traffic management costs are too high. And she was talking 25,000.
I think we're not going to be debating motions here.
No. What I'm asking for is just get some figures back on what it will actually be, because we've got a figure there of 20,000.
You'll be able to do that, David? Yeah.
Yep, that would be nice.
Okay.
So through the chair, a response to your question without notice, that we took on notice, CCS is coming to council on Thursday afternoon, but it was $1,195 for the carols traffic management, but that's in-kind support from council within the carols budget. The proposal from Councillor Solomon, when he sent through his form, indicated $15,000 towards traffic management, $5,000 towards marketing support, and $360 towards St John's ambulance support. Those figures he took directly from the responses to his questions around the Christmas activities and Main Street festivals. But those costs were what we incurred as council for the Gawler Civic Centre opening in 2019. There's no escalation in those costs.
Is it appropriate to really update this number so that it's as accurate as possible?
Well, through the chair, we'd need council to endorse that it wanted to consider that budget bid for us to then go down, and we need to understand routes, and also it's
Yes.
a bit too early to actually determine the exact amount for traffic
We
management.
need a traffic management plan and everything else, and yeah.
We'd have to get through the process of actually proceeding with the parade to get that final number.
But that could be a lot more expensive than that.
It could be, or it could be less, depending on the route outcome. For example, an idea that we could consider would to be hold a Christmas parade within the Gawler Showgrounds precinct. And it just goes around the internal of the Gawler Showgrounds. There'd be minimal traffic management costs associated with that, for example, as opposed to rolling closures or formal closures of roads if you were to do it in public road network.
Okay, all right. We'll put that up as a motion. I'm sure Isaac Solomon will put that up. Yes. I'll go to Deputy Mayor now, just, yep, thank you.
Through you, Chair, can we get an explanation on the last council moved to quarantine a certain figure for elected
Activation,
No, elected member bids.
yeah.
So I was just wondering if you could explain, because you said that the capital items aren't included, but what about the quarantined money?
Yeah, because
that
that,
sits-
that should be in the budget, that should be in the draft budget. Because that's right, there was a certain amount included, wasn't it 450,000?
Oh, it was a percentage.
It was
1%.
percentage.
Yeah, it was one from memory. I will be able to dig it out. It was
1% of the
it's
budget.
1% of your budget,
Yeah.
but I suppose the question is what's the budget? Whereas, so I think I interpreted that as your obviously operating budget, so it would be around about $280,000. But again, I suppose it's very difficult for me to determine to actually include it because effectively because these are a combination of capital budgets and recurrent budgets as well. So my understanding of the decision was that effectively $280,000 or whatever that figure was, 300,000 is available for elected member bids, but what the composition of those, so
Because
that's
that's a
where-
motion of council. That's a current motion of council.
That's correct. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I guess to that I would say, look, can we get some clarity between the administration here, because that was moved in the last term to do away with the we need to find savings to be able to put forward initiatives. But we're getting back into that debate, I feel, a little bit. So that was purposely done like that to ensure that we had a very small pocket of money that we could push forward on on initiatives that we deemed important to the community.
We don't need to spend that amount.
Oh, no.
But Nathan's right.
No, you don't
There
need to
is a
spend
current
100%.
motion, resolution on the books that states
Quarantine.
that there is a quarantine amount of money for elected member bids.
Yeah,
Now,
and
but
it's up to
I
us.
I still think we need to debate them.
Of 100%, there's no
I think
argument
that-
there.
I think that makes it robust.
And if we got to a position where, just for example, ease of math, we had $300,000 there and we had elected members bids of 50 grand, I think it's fair and reasonable that we talk about that $250,000 that are left over and either resurrect projects that are below the line, staff bids, whatever, or put it to savings, or whatever we choose to do with that 250,000. That would be a very good
Okay.
conversation.
No, I think that's a really good point. Do you want to say something, CEO?
The allocation of, and the application of that motion for last financial year, whether or not it was intended to be applicable for future budgets, what we've actually done through this cycle, and although we haven't specifically tagged them under the 1%, is that that's the value effectively that's been presented. So it's there, but it's never been the case that that 1%, that $300,000 is what, it's always been the case. It needs to be considered in the context of all the other bids. And it's at this point and at the council meeting where the council will then, in determining each one, assess the merits of them. in the context of the staff bids and in the context of the elected member bids. Because otherwise the approach that we would take is that we'll warranty $300,000 and we would have to remove $300,000 worth of staff bids. Now it's your judgment whether these are more important than the staff bids or not, and it's that process that we're going through.
No, I don't think that's where Nathan was sitting. I think that there is a current resolution on the books and that is valid. And it's not about a competition. It's about assessing the need. It's not about a competition. It's about, it's actually about collaboration. Yeah.
It's a competition, but I'm suggesting it's based on the merits of the bids. Now, if we have a bucket of $300,000 for elected member bids,
yep,
and we have to consider the merits of all the bids in as a collective, then these are the conversations where we will say either we, based on these initial numbers, the $1.5 million deficit goes to $1.8 million because all these bids will be provided for, or we stick to the 1.5 as best we can and we remove other bids throughout the budget that we've presented, then that's the process that we would otherwise be doing, whether we quarantine or otherwise.
I think we're getting off track just a little bit. However, I think that the reason to have motions is to discuss and put these bids to the test. And that goes to the heart of what the CEO was saying around the robustness of these bids. And I think it is important that we do that. I don't think that it's going to end up being 280,000. I think we were quite clear that there's going to be a couple that won't make the cut for various reasons. So I think we're all on the same page, but we're sort of getting off track just a little bit. So I might go over to you, Councillor Kosh.
Deputy Mayor, to explain Gawler 42, because I actually thought we actually had a development plan or equivalent that actually said that. But anyway, I'm happy to
It's
listen
the
to
code. We've got a design
a
code.
design code that actually
Yeah.
has overlays. I'm just wondering what this is and who's this working group?
Yeah, go
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah, look, I'd just love to talk about this topic. This has come about and is sort of timely, and I don't disagree that there is some overlap of strategic documents already done. What this is talking about is an overall aspirational plan that clearly states where and how we want our zones to work and how that works in not only the Gawler town borders, but how we sit regionally. You've heard me ask the RDA in their presentations about how valuable an overarching plan or idea would be when trying to attract those investment opportunities. We're also seeing some of the repercussions of the Vidulas matter on zoning potentials of sort of developers coming in and going, yeah, we want to rezone this. But if we had a clear direction of where we wanted our precincts and what we wanted to happen, I like the ability to be able to talk that through and really audit what we've got and then figure out what we would like in the overall plan. I know I've done a terrible job explaining that. It's getting a little bit late, but it's picking out, it's also using some of the strategic documents we already own as well, and also the master plans that we've already developed.
You've got a working group. Who are you anticipating
Yeah.
to be on that working group?
Yeah, so I mean, the experience that I had with the Climate Emergency Action Plan Working Group developed a strategic document that had a lot of community buy-in. I see some good stakeholders in the community to be able to help in the development of this plan. But then in saying that, I would also expect the ability to be able to pull in some executive staff or an economic development officer, for example. Also have some buy-in from the RDA, the Gawler Business Development Group. That sort of working group where we can actually audit what we have and what ideas we could have moving forward. And then also engage in a community consultation situation that would net good feedback from our community over a process. So I guess that's sort of, I think, Andrew, you were saying you wanted to comment on it or anything, but. Okay.
Why can't you speak? Aren't you allowed to speak?
Through
Oh, for
you,
God's sake.
through you, Chair.
Andrew, would you like to speak?
Thank you. I was excited because you mentioned land use strategic planning, so that got me all interested. I guess it's a question of timing and whether there's duplication or whether this value adds to something which is coming to council in April, which is the briefing on the growth framework. The growth infrastructure framework we've talked about a couple of times. If you listen back to the Concordia conversation today, they're talking about the regional framework,
Yeah.
the Adelaide 30-year plan.
Yeah.
The reason Barossa has done a growth framework is because they want to put input into that 30-year plan.
Yeah.
We're proposing a budget bid for next financial year, as you know, $55,000 to do a growth infrastructure framework.
Yeah.
It'll tackle parallel with Cuddler, the zonings down there. It'll talk about infrastructure priorities.
Yeah.
A range of the issues you're trying to talk about, I think. And I just wonder whether this is part of that story, but I
Okay.
could be wrong.
Okay, well, that's a bit of clarity around that, yeah. So maybe we will take that offline and have a further discussion, and I'll leave that up to you guys. Now, you wanted to say something?
No, I agree that it should go offline, but I think it needs to come back as part of the debate because I'm struggling to understand why we would do a parallel when we're employing planning people to do it for us. If it's about community engagement, once we've got that back, that's, maybe that's a different subject, but I'm feeling very uncomfortable about it. I type of understand where you want to go, but I think we're employing planners to start the process.
You've got your hand up, councillor Koch. Yep. Well, I think we'll take that offline and you can have further discussion and you might come up with, some outcome.
I noticed that Green and Gawler has dropped below the line.
I beg your pardon?
I noticed that greening of Gawler has dropped below the line.
Yeah.
And part of that, I thought part of that was not only trees, but biodiversity.
Yeah.
So I'm just concerned about that. And then I've looked at all the number of trees there, and I could go on about tree management, but I probably won't against the bore people. But I just don't know. I'm just really confused about what we're actually doing with these new trees. And I'll just quickly say it because when a tree is planted, you do your formative pruning when it's planted, and also you don't accept a tree that's got a bad framework, full stop. So when it's planted, you leave it for a year and you don't touch it, and therefore it just grows and grows and grows. So I don't know what people are doing with these new trees, basically. I don't know.
Through the chair, I'll put a couple of comments in. So I guess in those first couple of years, the maintenance cost is predominantly watering. So that's the predominant resource cost comes in. In terms of why it's dropped below the line, as we discussed in our tour last night, effectively over this financial year, we are already delivering 1,000 new trees for the town. We will have our annual tree planting program of 300 trees through our town services program.
Yeah.
And we'll have more trees coming over through development again.
There was a question around biodiversity.
Biodiversity.
So, yeah.
So this is something we discussed last night in our tour, and look, so that was dropped below the line before that conversation, and I think we can reopen that conversation and talk about, well, do we want to, bring a balance to what that looks like?
Yeah.
But I guess fundamentally, the getting Gawler greener and the tree planting budget bid that was initially put in as part of the budget bid proposals was associated with the increase in tree canopy targets within the climate emergency action plan. So it's that slight change in direction and association with an endorsed plan.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Any other discussion on any of these bits? Yep, councillor Hennessy.
Thank you, Mayor. I also note that the row marking identification project at the Williston Cemetery has dropped under the line. I understand with the Pioneer Park situation, which is going to give us quite a bit of expense, and the fact that we are now redoing the conservation and management plan for the Williston Cemetery, that will be incorporated into one of the priorities for the future. I just want to acknowledge, though, that from the community point of view, that is a long-standing request from our community to make it easier to locate graves in the cemetery, and I'll be perhaps talking to staff about how we might be able to get some other funding to move that forward, some type of grant funding, because there's going to be great disappointment that yet again that's not making the cut. So just wanted to record that.
And I think this reflects the hard decisions that are having to be made. And I think everyone, including you, Deputy Mayor, are making some hard decisions, and I acknowledge that. You know, these decisions aren't easy, and I guess we'll see where our discussions go. Now, oh God, is it 10 to 10? Oh, right. Didn't tell me, Cody, that it was 10 to 10. I didn't even look. Sorry about that. Is there any other discussion? Now, Councillor Lorna, you've not said much. Would you like to say anything? Would you like to say anything? Well, I apologise that I haven't actually given you an opportunity.
Look, in all honesty, being new to it all, I'm still just taking it all in at the moment, trying to work out what's going on. I'm appreciating the budget draft here that Sharon done. That was very good. That's very informative. So yeah, it is more or less me taking more of it in. And now my understanding is that we come back and then we basically vote on all this and put up motions on what we want to do.
So the next step is bringing back the draft budget for community consultation. I think that will be, if you tell us the timelines.
So what I was proposing is effectively having a special council meeting on the 4th of April to present the draft budget and to allow, I suppose, the decisions to be made as to what other projects that are in and out of the draft budget.
And that's where we'll present our motions and we'll debate, we'll have proper debate, we'll have proper decision-making functions, and then it'll come back.
So based on that endorsement, so basically you're just endorsing it, so you're not.
Well, we won't be endorsing it.
Or I suppose you're giving,
we're noting
it and you're supporting it.
Yeah.
And so then effectively then from that point of view, so that support of the draft budget of what administration's been put forward based on the decisions that you make, will then go to the audit committee. So effectively, a couple of weeks later, we'll go to the audit committee, and obviously the audit committee will make comment as to whether they think you need to do some more things or it's all okay, and all that sort of stuff. And then it will come back to, and so I'll take all that information, prepare the annual business plan and budget based on obviously the decisions that have made by council, present the recommendations back to you from the audit committee. And then you can have your decision on it for public consultation, and then effectively it will go out for public consultation.
When will
So
what month will that be?
May. So pretty much there is a quick turnaround, and I probably won't sleep because effectively for what I would actually like to have is, just from the timing, is to have the draft annual business plan and budget for you to consider for consultation at the April meeting on the 26th of April. So, and we've got Easter and Anzac Day in between there and all that sort of stuff. So I definitely won't be sleeping. So yeah,
So
so,
we
and
have-
then it will go out to public consultation on the 1st of May.
So the 26th of April is our council meeting and it will be brought into that meeting for public consultation, asking us to endorse it for public consultation. So that's a Wednesday night meeting, just so everyone's aware. But that, you'll see it in our diary. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
I know we're getting late, so I've only just got two more, just on page 4 of 11. I just had a question through you, Chair. So we've got the Hydrovac trailer. So-
Hydrovac trailer.
Yeah, Hydrovac trailer,
Yeah.
which, you know, I'm usually all for buying infrastructure in so we don't have to contract that sort of work in. But my question there would be, how much do we spend a year on Hydrovac and what projects do we have requested in the budget that we would actually, what's our return on investment, I guess?
Yeah. Is that your?
Yeah, through the chair. So the return on investment is 18 months, 24 months. So we use Hydrovac a lot and in a lot of our standard projects. However, I will say that this is one that if we had to drop more capital, we could drop it off. We can use external services, but it would be great to have it in-house because at the moment we're at the mercy of when they're available. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's a good answer. Yeah.
That is, and that's handy to know, because yeah, those hard cuts where we have that new infrastructure, maybe we just stick with the status quo to save X amount. But you know, knowing that payback is very handy and whether or not we choose to move it. The other point is on the replacement 5 vehicles as per vehicle replacement program. So previously in other,
Where are you? Where are you,
I'm
Dave?
still on 4 of 11, the
Still
second
on
to
4?
last.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep,
second
yep,
to last bit. And this talks about the light fleet this time, but it's still the same point that's been.
Oh,
made.
yeah, 10-year replacement program.
Yeah, flagged, and I do see the list of cars there, and the question was asked last time on, yes, I understand the policy, but is there scope to turn around and say, can we keep these cars because actually they're still in pretty good nick, and can we stretch them out for an 11th year, etc. Because that same question was also asked on fleet, you know, for utes, etc. I know the policy is 5 years, but in the private industry, if we're short on cash, we will stretch out those utes that are still functioning fine
Yeah.
another year.
So maybe take that on notice. Is that your portfolio, Wendy? Yeah, so maybe take that on notice and we might, if you can circulate your explanation or your response
Yeah.
to that might be
'Cause-
something to think about.
Because I think that point has been flagged a couple of times.
Yeah, it
so,
has.
yeah.
Yeah, it has. And I think that's a good pickup. Yeah.
So we've already provided, following the initial question in relation to that. So a response was actually provided to elected members following the session that.
That could be
probably would have been-
recirculated.
Yeah, we can recirculate it, but yeah.
That'd be
it's-
great. So if we recirculate that's great. That would be great. Thank you, Sharon and Wendy. Okay, any other questions? If not, we might call it quits tonight. And thank you everyone for coming along and thank you for the lively discussion. Oh, I started watching it, but I couldn't